Scripture reading this morning is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. It can be found on page 163 in your Pew Bible if you'd like to follow along. Page 163 in the New Testament portion. And I will be reading verses 10 through 15. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building on it. Each builder must choose with care how to build on it. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one that has already been laid. That foundation is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold or silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, the work of each builder will become visible, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each has done. If what has been built on the foundation survives, the builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The builder will be saved, but only as through fire. When the first European settlers arrived in this country, they did not build log cabins for the simple reason that they were not familiar with log cabins. Log cabins were introduced by the Scandinavian immigrants about a century later, and quickly caught on. But the Pilgrims came from England and built their homes as they had always been built. They would erect some posts and put up some beams, and the walls would then be filled in with what they called wattle and daub, which was essentially mud and sticks that were bound together with lime that turned them into kind of a concrete. In England, the important ingredient lime was readily available. And the final result was a reasonably secure house. But here in America, lime was not yet available. So the people built their homes with sticks and with mud, which unfortunately made a house that simply was not as durable or as sturdy as what they were accustomed to. Then they would thatch the roof, and the outside would be covered with wood clapboards if they could get them. But it didn't take long for the walls to dry out and begin to crumble. Emmanuel Alphen wrote a letter from the Plymouth colony to his brother back in England and reported that there were now about 20 homes, but only about 5 of them are any good. The following year, Captain John Smith recorded that Plymouth then had about 32 houses, but 7 of them had burned down the previous winter. The thatched roofs caught fire so very easily. All it took was an ember from a neighbor's chimney, and the house would quickly be engulfed with flames. Aside from the very real threat of fire, the building materials simply didn't hold up very well. It was rare for a home to last more than 10 years. And then in 1634, a hurricane came spinning up the East Coast and literally destroyed half the houses in Massachusetts. All right, we think we have problems. The reason I mention this is because we have had a remarkable number of tornadoes come through this area in just the past 2 months. On July 29th, a storm that gave rise to 26 tornadoes swept through the region. There were 6 tornadoes in New Jersey. There were 13 in Pennsylvania. One of the tornadoes was rated as an EF3 and destroyed a Faulkner dealership building in Bensalem, and the debris just showered down on all of the vehicles in the lot. 10 days ago, the remnants of Hurricane Ida swept through the area, causing widespread flooding and spawning more tornadoes. And the word that I heard used over and over again by television meteorologists to describe the size and the number of tornadoes was unprecedented. People are asking, is this year unusual? Is 2021, was this an anomaly? Or is this going to be the new normal? Is this the result of climate change? And are we going to start getting 20 or 30 tornadoes a year? And if so, then changes will need to be made to the building codes so that homes and buildings will be more resistant to having their roofs blown off or their walls blown out or the kind of damage that the high winds can cause. You probably saw the pictures of the homes destroyed over in Mullica Hills. Oh, large, beautiful homes. Must have cost a fortune. Looked like the corners were built with dressed stones. I mean, they looked strong. They looked well built. But the wind came, destroyed one, tore the roof off another, blew the end right off of one house. And the television cameras were looking right into this guy's closet. Here was a house that looked as strong as a castle. But what appeared to be stone corners were just vinyl. They were just plastic. They were there for appearance. And appearances just don't count for much when you're in a tornado. But appearances do matter when applied to the balance sheet of the costs and profits when building a development. Appearances matter a great deal when you're going to sell your home. What do the kitchen cabinets look like? And is the countertop Formica or is it granite or is it engineered quartz? At an open house in May, no one is going to be thinking about tornadoes. They're going to be thinking about the school district and the number of bedrooms and the tax rate and if the house adequately represents the person that they want portrayed to society. And historically, location has also been a very important consideration. It was the middle of summer, 1783. Philadelphia was a city of about 50,000 residents and served as the capital of our new country. On August the 19th, a fellow named Peter Aston suddenly died of a fever, and his skin appeared yellow and jaundiced. Prominent local doctor Benjamin Rush identified it as yellow fever. Within a week, what was described as a universal terror gripped Philadelphia. People would be healthy one day and be dead the very next. 100 people a day were dying. The streets were filled with carts and wagons of people trying to escape. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and much of the federal government fled the city. Congress was adjourned and moved out to what was then a remote little village called Germantown. No one knew what caused the disease or how it was spread, but Dr. Rush believed it had something to do with the bad smells of Philadelphia in the summer. He insisted the docks needed to be cleaned of rotting vegetation. The sewers need to be cleaned. And at a time when horses provided the primary role of when horses did most of the pulling and transportation, the streets need to be cleaned and houses need to be cleaned. And the ongoing emphasis on cleanliness led Benjamin Latrobe to design the waterworks to provide clean water to the city of Philadelphia. In October, after taking perhaps 5,000 lives, now think of that. That's 10% of the population of the city dying in just 2 months to this fever. The epidemic suddenly stopped. Wow. You see, a cold snap froze the water in all the stagnant puddles and pools around the city. The breeding of the mosquitoes came to an end. But there was still that lingering belief that bad smells were dangerous. And whenever possible, people chose to live out in the clean air of the countryside, which may have been a factor in the popularity of living out here on the main line. Bad-smelling cities were not limited to America. In London, the sewage and the waste from 3 million people were dumped into the Thames River. But in the summer of 1858, London suffered from a heat wave combined with a drought. And all of that waste just sat there, rotting in the sun. The London Times called it the Great Stink. As the river grew so odious, no one could stand to be near it. And it was said that anyone who inhaled the odor would never forget it. Parliament was suspended, and the crisis laid the political groundwork for the building of the 1,200 miles of brick tunnels that would compose the London sewers. At that time, for obvious reasons, having a country estate, having a house out there somewhere, away from the smells of the big city, was very stylish and popular among England's wealthiest class. If you could afford to make this cottage really spectacular, why, it was a way of promoting yourself and advertising your own importance to friends or visitors you would invite out to your place. And as time went by, the grounds, the landscaping became just as important as the house itself. It wasn't enough just to own a mansion. The property needed to be properly landscaped. You needed to have a wonderful view. Suddenly, world-class landscape artists were in high demand. Some landscapers took drastic steps to improve the view, like moving hills and digging out and installing lakes. In some cases, whole villages were labeled as unsightly and removed. Occasionally, a ruined castle would be built to give the estate a focal point, a special feel of significance and history. For a time, it was even fashionable to build a hermitage with a real live Christian hermit living on the property in a cave or a cellar or a hut somewhere off on the property line. And just as today, some people might want to drive out to Lancaster to see the Amish with their horse-drawn buggies and their unique clothing, imagine going out to a country estate and having the excitement of seeing a hermit off there in the distance, wearing his monk habit, carrying a wooden bucket to get water out of the well. Wouldn't that be special? Wouldn't that be the sort of thing all of your important friends would want to see and talk about? The problem was, where do you find a hermit? I don't know, maybe you could hire an unemployed actor that looked like a hermit. You're not likely to draw a hermit to your property with, material benefits as you might some other profession. One hermit signed a contract to live on an estate for 7 years, observing complete silence, and he would be paid £100 a year, which was clearly a good salary in that day. He was fired after only 3 weeks when he was discovered hoisting pints at the local pub. At another estate, a hermit was promised £50 a year if he would live on the estate in an underground dwelling without cutting his hair or his nails or talking to another person. He lasted 4 years before he decided he simply couldn't take it any longer. I don't know how you folks are managing with some of the COVID shutdowns. Makes me appreciate how much I like being around people. I mean, I can go for a couple days, but boy, I could never be a hermit myself. Historically, though, hermits were so focused on personal piety, mastering their own sins, which they felt tempted by, that they frequently came across as being kind of peculiar. The hermits actively resisted indulging every whim or impulse. Now, the Apostle Paul once compared himself to an athlete in training that practices self-control in all things. I punish my body, I enslave it. Paul was not a hermit, but he did choose to live simply, and his words were an inspiration to all those who felt that God was calling them to live this way. Now, some of the hermits came from wealthy families and very comfortable circumstances, but through a religious experience of one kind or another, they came to see their lives as being shallow, meaningless. They felt that God was calling them to a special obedience, to something deeper and more meaningful. And as a result, they chose to separate themselves from all of the false values and false messages of the world. They wanted to devote themselves completely to God. And rather than always trying to acquire more or keep up with the changing fashions, they chose intentionally to live simply and live with less. The early church scholar Origen practiced extreme austerity in food and in drink and even in sleep. Wow, what an example. I know I've got a drawer on my desk full of snacks. That's what keeps me going. Origen, no way. He was not living to indulge his body. When he felt tempted for food or water even, or sleep, not today. I don't really need it. He mastered his body. He did not strive to satisfy every little twinge and impulse. He was totally committed to giving his life in the service of God's kingdom. And for over 1,000 years, some hermits chose to live on top of tall columns or pillars, separated from the world, completely dependent upon the generosity of pilgrims who might happen by. Now, in the Old Testament, we read the rule about building an altar out of stones. Such an altar was to be made of stones that were uncut or unhewn. After all, God had made the stones. And who are you to try to improve upon the work of God? Hermits would carry this idea over to their own personal hygiene, and they would refuse to shave or cut their hair or in any way strive to improve upon what God had made. The hermit accepts, this is a tough one. I wish Sherry were here to help me with the Greek. Aksepsimos. Try saying that quickly. The hermit Aksepsimos went for 60 years without speaking, and he had the usual hermit-like aversion to personal hygiene. A shepherd once chased him away, throwing stones at him. Reportedly, the shepherd thought he was some kind of a weird wolf creature who was after his sheep. What is it? Must be a monster. Chase it away. So why? Why did well-to-do estate owners want to have a hermit living on their estate? Well, it was a novelty. It was a tourist attraction, a strange sight that other people might be interested in. They certainly didn't want a priest who would come and conduct a service or preach a sermon. They didn't want a monk who would copy the gospel manuscripts or teach the gospel. They didn't want a friar who would be out ministering to the poor, the sick, the hungry of the community. They wanted a hermit who would keep quiet and far away from everyone. We don't want him to interfere with us or with our guests, or point out our extravagance when others are going hungry. We just want someone who's really strange so we can point them out as a warning of what can happen if you take your religion too seriously. Well, how are we building our homes this morning? How are we constructing our lives? Are we using mud and sticks and things that will simply crumble away with time? Are we using stones made of plastic that look strong, but which will simply blow away in a strong wind? Is our goal to separate ourselves from the problems and the miseries and the stink of the world? Is our faith just an ornament, something that makes the view more interesting, but having no real role in our lives or our decisions? Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door knocking, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in." Jesus did not come to be held off at arm's length, but to be involved with our lives as we strive to serve God's kingdom. Amen.